And I think Europe's really hurting their cause, because a lot of us who really support NATO and really want us to be engaged are getting very tired of the censorship. They went after Musk, and they go after the Reform Party, and they go after any conservative party, and they do things that nobody in the United States could ever imagine, the level of censorship.
Hello and welcome back to the Americano Show. Now, this is our end of year review, which we like to do with one of the greatest voices in America, and that's the voice of Victor Davis Hanson, renowned scholar and classicist and expert on all things that are going on in America and elsewhere. Victor, this time last year, I think it's fair to say you're feeling quite bullish about the Trump administration. And we did have this extraordinary first 100 days where the phrase of the moment was breakneck speed, because the Trump administration seemed to be doing so much on so many fronts. And yet I think it's also fair to say that inevitably all administrations run into mud at some point. And towards the back end of this year, we've seen the Trump administration beginning to hit some obstacles on various fronts. Give me your sort of broad assessment of how you think this first year of the Trump administration has gone.
Well, I think it's been pretty good, but I think they're losing the narrative in this sense that when they came in January, the aggregate inflation rate was 21% for the prior 4 years, 5.2 a year. And there were people who were very angry about affordability. But rather than talk about immediate action, I don't think people who have looked at it say that, maybe in the case of farm products, but the tariffs really didn't, as the Wall Street Journal and others said, cause a trade war, or we didn't have a recession or a collapse. But I think what happened was they got so involved with, and it was very good to take out the Iranian nuclear potential, and then we had the Middle East war resolutions, and then Trump was very happy, or he wanted to let people know that he was involved in 8 or 9 ceasefires. Then we had the back and forth with Ukraine, but I don't think he realized that resonated to the people who had suffered under the hyperinflation, that he was more busy overseas than at home. And then the things that he was doing that he thought people understood were actually all long-term things. So what do I mean by that? He says 20 trillion. I think the Wall Street Journal is more accurate, 10 trillion in foreign investment. That's the best year that Biden had for foreign investment was 1 trillion the last year. So if you get $10 trillion in foreign investment, the big beautiful bill has massive deregulation and extends the tax cuts and actually increases the tax cuts. And then we're pumping now 14 million barrels a day almost. Nobody's ever done that in the history of civilization. And same thing with natural gas. And they're going to go into ANWR. They're going to build Keystone. They're going to go into ANWR. They're building massive plants for export of natural gas to Europe, liquefied natural gas. So, and then what I'm getting at is all of these things are going to be 9-10 months down the road. So what I would have counseled, but nobody, who am I to say, but I would have said, keep the focus on the economy. You came in, and you need to say that when you came in, the inflation rate was 3% in January of 2025, and the last quarter inflation rate was 3%. You did not increase it, but you did not increase it, but you did not lower it. But you have a whole bunch of long-term things that are going to kick in next year, with energy prices going even lower. They're already 40 cents lower than they were on the average of the Biden years, at $3.40 down to $3 a gallon. You've got all this. Get that message out. And I think they got so tied up with these foreign, what they felt were very undisputed accomplishments, and they were, but the people in the MAGA base started to defect. And a lot of the people said, well, he's just overseas, and that was not his brand. And then the other thing very quickly is it's very easy to let in 12 million people in 4 years, but it's very hard to find them. And so the left then kind of just said, you're arresting Herlinda Gomez on her way to clean house, when actually if you look, only 30% of the deportations so far have been collateral. Meaning when you go in and get a criminal and there's people in the vicinity, you check their ID, they don't have it, then they have to be deported. But they're not the primary targets. But that didn't get out either. And so I think a lot of it is they're banking that they have 1 year for these actions, policies that they put in motion, and we'll see if it actually gives us 4 or 5% GDP and lower inflation. And the interest rates, I think, are going to go down as well.
Mm. Well, I mean, on that point about inflation, it's been said a lot, and it's true that one of the worst things the Biden administration did in terms of the way it talked to voters was it kept insisting that inflation was transitory when it clearly wasn't, and people didn't feel it to be that. And seems like something similar has been happening recently with Trump, who's very irritable, it seems, when asked about affordability. And, insists that America is the hottest country in the world and that energy prices are very low. And I could see what you're saying, that in the long term, they're hoping to turn this around. But it is the same mistake of telling voters that they're doing fine when they're not feeling that they're doing fine.
I think that's a good point. I think you can see that this week, all of a sudden, the message just turned 180 degrees. They're talking about affordability and we're going to do this and that. But I don't think he understood the way American politics, not to say that Trump doesn't, he's a very good politician, but when you come into office, you are responsible for everything that happened the prior 4 years. And the people don't want to hear that Obama used to say, I came in with a broom and I had to clean up the mess, but he got clobbered in the midterms. And so when Trump came in, fairly or not, the inflation rate was 3%, but it had averaged 5.2 each year, and it was 21 in aggregate. And everything, but that didn't tell the whole story. When you look at insurance, house prices, food, cars, the things that count, they were up 25 to 30%. We never had that before. And so people said, Donald Trump cares about the middle class. They thought he would just say, this is a Marshall Plan to lower prices. What he said instead was, this is a Marshall Plan to increase oil production, to repeal DEI, to stop the transgendered, and to close the border, to deport, to go overseas and get 7-8 ceasefires, to take out the Iranian nuclear plant, to get a peace, and that message was lost.
Mm. It's also a problem in that he has effectively stopped mass illegal immigration.
He has.
To an extraordinary extent. But it's also a problem with mass illegal immigration, as you alluded to in your answer there, that people don't really feel the benefits of that in their everyday lives because they're still dealing with a large influx of people that they weren't very happy about.
I can tell you, I have been going through the medical system because of a problem, and I can tell you in California, where 27% of the population was foreign-born, and we may have half of all the illegal aliens in the United States, that our healthcare system has been absolutely clogged. When you let in millions of people, that's the beginning, not the end of the question, because they come from mostly now this second cycle or third cycle of illegal immigration is largely from Oaxaca, Michoacan, and Chiapas, and they're indigenous people who have not had access in Mexico to healthcare or any entitlement. So when they come up here, and I know a lot of doctors, and I've been dealing with the medical system, suddenly they present in an emergency room with a whole array of everything from TB to cancer to anything, and it's very expensive. And so what I'm getting at is not allowing that to happen. And we had 1 million self-deportations, and we've had 1 million deportations in the first 10 months. And then, as we see in Minnesota with the Somali thing, and we've had a huge abuse of the social welfare system, not in the millions as we were told, but probably the multi-billions. And we're already seeing that there is a shortage now of U.S. citizen workers because people are asking and wages are going up. So like these other issues in the economy, that's going to help in 9 to 10 months. You're going to see that the social welfare system, if your mother is on dialysis, she's not going to have to wait 6 weeks as happened in the last 4 or 5 years. And if you're working on a construction crew, paving a road, you're going to be able to be in a more advantageous position about wages. Might be a little bit of inflationary, but that's not going to take hold because we think, and they use the word intrants rather than entries, so we don't know whether they're talking about, in connection with the Biden open border, an individual or an entrant that could be one individual many times. But it seems that it's 10 to 12 million people. And that means if you get 2 million, you're still less than 10% maybe, or 20%, let's say. So the half the job is done on the border, but the other half, no one has ever done that in a Western country before. We haven't seen that since the early pre-war years, that you actually return millions of people to their home country. And that's something the Western world's never really dealt with. It goes against DEI, it goes against the idea of liberal democracy, and it has to be done. If you live in a place where I do, where 17,000 licenses were given to people who here illegally who couldn't read English, and you see the mayhem on the freeway. I've seen 3 of these accidents. And then when you want to get an appointment for a CT scan, and it used to take a week, and now they say come back in 3 months. Or you go to the ER, I have, when there used to be in my community, say 10, 12 people, and you go there and there's 80 people there, and you're the only one speaking English, you're the only one with health care, and there's a policeman checking your ID because of gang activities that occur inside this is all new. And to alleviate these things are all going to have economic benefits, but the chaos of trying to go back to normalcy is such that I think it overwhelmed the administration. They never said anything like, we close the border, but that's only half of it, everybody. We have the most gargantuan task in the history of this country. We have to restore citizenship, the primacy of citizenship. And unfortunately, it's tragic, but we're going to have to ask people to go home. And if they want to apply, they have to apply legally. But we never got that message. Instead, it was Tom Homan as a Gestapo SS officer, and he's going into Chicago and he's arresting people. And he went in and he got 5 murders and rapists, but there was, Juan Flores was next. He was just in the room. He didn't know anybody, and he's working on a construction crew. And now he's deported, and he has 3 children, and that was the media story.
Trump is a master of narrative control, I would say. And so in his first term, it felt very much like he was building into this great story of economic growth. And it was looking like it might happen. And then, of course, it was massively derailed by COVID. And that probably cost him the election. This time, he's apparently very focused on the midterms. And it could be the case that he's getting a lot of the bad news out of the way. We had these November elections. You had the election of Mandami in New York, but you also had some very worrying elections for Republicans in other states where they lost by bigger margins than were expected, probably because of this affordability issue. But it could be the case that he is, in his mind and in the minds of White House strategists, they're thinking we will build up to a positive crescendo in time for the midterms. Obviously, this is easier said than done, but that's what's going on, isn't it?
No, you're absolutely right. And I've talked to people in the administration that echo almost verbatim what you said, with a little, I would say, an asterisk. They even add things that psychologically, this is going to be the 250th year of the Constitution, and they're going to have a the Declaration, and we're going to have a huge celebration nationwide, and it's also going to be the World Cup and things like that. So they're going to have a lot of positive news. They feel that in some ways this might be better to get all of the bad medicine out of the way, and then the fruits will come in June or July and be fresh in the mind of the November voter. So, and I think you can see the last 2 or 3 days he's angry that, and he's actually angry at all of his people too. He said, we need to talk about the economy in the long term. They need to frame it in good things are coming. The best spokesman that I think the people have found is Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, because he's been saying that we're doing things that have never been seen before, as in terms of energy production or in terms of foreign investment or in terms of deregulation. I mean, if he had just done one of these things, he has basically destroyed the new Green Deal. All of the green mandates, billions of dollars for inefficient solar and wind have been replaced by fast-tracking nuclear. I mean, there's things going on that I don't think anybody they haven't told us, but when the AI people, Altman and Musk and all of these people said we need 100,000 megawatt plants a year, or we're going to lose the AI race. That 1,000 megawatt plant is a huge plant, and they want 1,000 or over 3 years. 4 years. So, and they're going to do it. They're going to fast track that, and they're going to do nuclear. And they think that 40% of the power grid. We are the biggest nuclear producer already, but what they're talking about has never been envisioned before. Is what I'm trying to say. Nor has going in and producing 16 to 17 million barrels. So we don't know the effect of that. We don't know the effect of exempting all sorts of people from the tax code, tips, and things like that, first responders. We don't know what the effect will be on the universities of telling them you're going to have to pay some money on endowment income taxes or on remittances. We have over $1 trillion in remittances to India, to China, to south of the border. But none of that has been explained in detail. But you're starting to get a little bit of feeling that, prices kind of held steady in November. Everybody pointed out that the basket of Thanksgiving was lower than it had been in 2 years. Gasoline is getting very, very low. We haven't seen that since the first Trump administration. So you can see some of the indications, and you can see their reaction to it. And but I do think Donald Trump was so proud of the things he had done that if you looked at there were two narrative cycles that I've seen the last 3 months. One was Trump with foreign leaders in the White House talking about either trade deals or ceasefires or Ukraine or the Middle East. And the other was two left-wing narratives in the legacy media that he's rounding up innocents like the SS and that he doesn't care about people. He's overseas while you're paying all these prices. And that was something that had to be addressed. I think they're doing it belatedly, but they still have plenty of time.
Well, I mean, they do have time, but at the same time, they don't have much time because these midterms are make or break. It seems because if you look at Congress is already providing obstacles to the Trump agenda with a Republican majority. If they can't do something pretty exceptional and maintain or even expand their majority in November, then they're going to face all sorts of obstacles on everything from DEI to the green agenda to
they will.
foreign policy.
The worst will be the subpoena power. The House alone has subpoena power, and you're going to see every single Trump cabinet official and minor bureaucrat brought in. And you'll probably see within 30 days of a Democratic majority a successful impeachment of Trump. It won't lead to a conviction, but it will lead to what happened last time. People forget in the first term that 10 days after the Mueller's investigation that went 22 months said there's nothing here, 10 days later they started the first impeachment, and that ate up the rest of his. That went on and on and on and on, and it was a silly writ, and the Senate, of course, didn't act on it. There was no conviction, but that's not the point. The point is to consume time and resources with impeachment proceedings, and they've already said they're going to do that. So that would be, but they have about a year to do that, and I think they still have time because I do think the economy you can feel it. You can start to see. I'm living on a country road right now, and I've never seen semi trucks go by every 5 minutes with construction materials. And I'm talking to people in a very poor community about jobs, and that I'm a little worried that all these jobs are opening up or announced, and I'm not sure they're going to have enough workers. So, but you can get the impression that things are starting to move in the oil industry, in the mining industry, and pipelines, and oil refineries, and export, and all of these. It depends on you gauge. I've talked to a lot of economists at the Hoover Institution, and how you calibrate foreign investment in terms of job creation is disputed depending on where the money goes. But $10 trillion, if that happens over the next year or two, is such a huge figure. They're talking about millions and millions of jobs, 8, 9 million jobs created by this fantastic amount of foreign monies. The key will be to see if it actually, materializes. And that will depend a lot on Trump's reputation, stature abroad.
Well, another area where they seem to lose control of the narrative, and I realize politics isn't all about narratives, but it's interesting to look back on, is the Epstein story, where it really felt that for once the Democrats had a story that they could run with. The media were interested in a story that the Trump administration weren't themselves driving, and it's going to rumble on, and Trump wants to dismiss it as a kind of Russiagate hoax, and in many ways it has some of the similar characteristics of a kind of story that the Democratic media are just pushing obsessively. But it has been something where Trump seemed to just mishandle it, or the Trump administration seemed to mishandle it.
Yeah, I didn't understand that. I have talked to a lot of people about it, and to cut to the quick, what I was told was there were powerful people who had done nothing wrong, but they appeared in the tweets, the emails, some of the testimonies in Congress, maybe IRS, all of these different sources of material that comprise the so-called file. There is no Epstein file. It's just a compilation of data from various sources that find their way in there. But Joe Biden had control, and Merrick Garland had control of that corpus, and Donald Trump. It was leaked out that Donald Trump had written on Jeffrey Epstein's birthday. There were some embarrassing little notes, but it wasn't fatal to Trump, because the key problem the Biden administration had by leaking it is that Donald Trump had cut off Jeffrey Epstein, and here was the key: not after he was convicted or accused, but prior to his indictment. So he said, "I don't want anything to do with this guy." Then the person was indicted and convicted, and the people on the Epstein files, the vast majority of them appear either during the Epstein problem or after, when they knew, like Larry Summers, for example, he knew that Epstein had already gone through the justice system. And it was generally recognized in the media that there were 80% to 90% of the names given who Jeffrey Epstein wanted to impress. He didn't want to impress some businessman in Ohio. He wanted to impress the Ivy League intellectual, the corporate people in Wall Street, the liberal people. So most of the name, and that's why they weren't released. So then people jumped the gun. Kash Patel, Pam Bondi said, "We're going to release this." Everybody got excited. And then I think what happened, a lot of people called the administration and said, wait. I saw Jeffrey Epstein. He hit me up for money. I went and had a drink at his apartment. Next thing I know, he writes an email saying, "Come down to the island." I never did. That kind of stuff. So then they thought, well, let's hold on to it. And then the base said, "Well, you're a hypocrite. You've got to release it." And then they set out the narrative. They were playing three-dimensional chess. That they had said Epstein files, so that the left would get all excited, make a bunch of false accusations. They would spring the files out, and it would all be Democrats. To some extent, that's happened. That most of the stuff that's come out, they have names like Larry Summers or others. There hasn't been a big Republican in there yet, and there will be more out. But again, the narrative hasn't. I thought somebody would come out and say, "You wanted them, here they are." But when you hear that narrative, it's always columnists, pundits, people on television are saying, "Wow, the Democrats put their head in the noose, or they put a gun to their head. Now we're starting to see this, and it's all Democrats." But you think the administration would be the ones leaking that or leading with that story, and you don't hear Trump talk. I think he just feels that, I don't want a guy I golf with to be hurt, but he should just say, let the names come all out, and you let the people decide whether they're Democrats or Republicans, or if it matters, and get it all out. And I think that's happening, but it's not quick enough to kill the story.
Well, an argument you hear a lot on the right, which I think is probably true, is that if there was something terribly damning against Trump in these files, then the Democrats would have gotten it out when they were in control of the Department of Justice and the FBI.
They couldn't let it out because, as I said, he was one of the few officials that cut Epstein off. The whole key here in this country is at what time period did you cut? When you say you didn't have anything to do with him, was it before he was a charge, or did you were an intimate friend and then you only were forced to cut off your friendship because he was an albatross suddenly with this indictment of child trafficking and all that stuff? But Trump was one of the first, and I don't know why they didn't. A lot of his defenders said, wait. He kicked them out before he even knew for sure that he was doing these things, because he had never been accused by a government prosecutor. But that didn't get out as well. I think a lot of people think that they need a quick response, rapid response team a little bit at a higher level than they're getting as far as the media team around you.
And you said, if he can fix things on the international stage, then he can focus more on the domestic side of things. Clearly, the big one there is Ukraine, and the administration has not been able to make the progress that it wants to in Ukraine, and there are differences with Europe over it, and so on. How do you think that's going to play out over the next few months?
I don't know, but I think we in the United States, and maybe also you in Europe, always knew what the outline was, that Ukraine did not have the wherewithal to get back the Donbass or Crimea. It wasn't going to be in NATO, and the issues under contention were, one, what type of necessary guarantee would Ukraine get, whether armaments or backup or logistics, so Putin couldn't do this again, and two, is the DMZ going to be where the current battle line is? And that's what Trump thought. And then he was going to use economic pressure, rare earths, all this other stuff. But apparently Vladimir Putin has some imaginary line westward that he must get to explain this terrible blunder to the Kremlin oligarchs or military or whoever's also is a dangerous person in the Kremlin, because I don't think where he is now, he thinks he can say, I lost 1.2 million Russians dead, wounded, missing, and guess what? I moved 75 miles more from the Donbass that I had, and I don't think that's enough for him. So I think he's wanting to go leapfrog over the existing fortifications and Ukraine lines and have an open pathway and say, I was able to get a ceasefire and they dismantled their fortifications, and now I'm facing them, and then quietly saying, if we ever want to do this again, we're in a much better position. And that's what I wanted all along. And I institutionalized the Crimea. I institutionalized the Donbass acquisitions. I think Trump thinks everybody wins. He from what he says, well, Zelensky's a hero. He saved Kiev. He saved 90% of Ukraine is still Ukrainian from where it was on February 24th. And so he's a winner, and Putin got what he wanted. He institutionalized Crimea and Donbass. He got them out of NATO. So whammo, let's get it done. That's his attitude. But he can't get the DMZ, the eventual DMZ, exactly where the battlefield line is today. And as far as I guarantee, the MAGA base will not allow him to say, I'm going to step in if Europe is overwhelmed, backing up. But I must say there's a little bit of growing anger at Europe right here in the United States, that on his base, a lot of anger, because we're starting to feel that Europe is a one-eyed jack, that we have on the one hand NATO saying that we're going to spend 2%, yes, we're going to spend 5%, yes, we're all here and we're going to back them and we're going to be muscular. And so the first question is, well, great, then you just need us more remotely than in the past, not more engaged than the past, given your newfound militarism. Then the other problem is that of the 32 nations that comprise NATO, 27 of them are the EU members. So then you have the other side of the jack saying, well, we're going to start censoring X, and we're going to cancel any participation where Israel. So what I'm getting at is, these same nations on one side are way to the left of the U.S. on matters of energy, on matters of Israel, on matters of censorship, on matters of their attitude toward this growing conservative movement with it. And they say, don't dare, you upstarts, don't dare tell us in our domestic politics, the alternative for Deutschland or the reform. It's none of your business. But then they turn around and say, it is your business. You're part of NATO. You're part of Europe. You've got to get in here and get involved with us. And so we're saying it's all connected, Europe. You're either a Western ally of the United States or you're not. But you can't say you want our arms like we're mindless Roman legions and you're Greek philosophers, and then turn around and, trash us as yokels. And I think Europe's really hurting their cause, because a lot of us who really support NATO and really want us to be engaged are getting very tired of the censorship. They went after Musk, and they go after the Reform Party, and they go after any conservative party, and they do things that nobody in the United States could ever imagine, the level of censorship or anti-Semitic foreign policy and stuff like that.
And you can see it too in the National Security Strategy document that came out on Friday. Yes. You can see this. But what struck me in that document, reading European press about it, seemed like it was a sort of very rude statement about what a disaster Europe is and civilizational erasure and all that sort of stuff. But actually reading it, it's very positive about Europe and wanting to engage and wanting to make Europe great again and so on.
Yeah, I think what got Europe so mad was just exactly what you said. They said it was sort of like a big brother condescending, put his arm around him and said, look, shape up. We're on the same team. We want to be partners. We don't want to be your big brother. We want to be equal brothers. But for you to be equal to us, you're going to have to, you've got a lot of natural resources. You've got oil under the ocean. You've got natural gas in France. You can go nuclear. You can get rid of this green madness. You can have a First Amendment. You can go rearm. You can close your borders. You can deport people like us that have no intention of ever, acculturating or integrating within European. That's what the message was. And I think the Europeans, I think they really resent when Trump says Western civilization, and you were the founder of Western civilization. Come on, like, you need a slap in the face to wake up and take your prominent role as the premier Western font of all of our civilization. So in a weird way, it's sort of praising Europe, and we'd like to reference you and your legacy for us and where we all came from in the United States that founded the country, but you're not letting us do that. That's sort of what the message was.
And lastly, Victor, because I know you have to go, but I wanted to ask you, as an expert in civilizational collapse, that next year you talked about this 250th anniversary, and I think there will be this attempt by the Trump administration to sort of rev up a sense of national renewal and pride in America, and a sense that America is a positive place and is going in a positive place, and the world can follow America into positive places. How realistic do you think it is that they'll be able to achieve that sort of mood change in America and the world?
I'm not sure. That's a really good question, because the type of it reminds me of what the Livy said in his proem to his history, the great Roman historian. He said, "We can't live with a malady and we can't live with a medicine." And what I'm getting at is there's 4 or 5 things. We're talking about symptoms, but as in Europe, there's 4 or 5 causes of those symptoms. One is the fertility. And when you're down to 1.39, we're about 1.75, but we're shrinking. And to tell the half of the country that didn't vote for Donald Trump, that is, tell the whole country in toto, we've got to start promoting the family and their fertility, and we need to have children, and we got to go back to the traditional family. That's going to be very hard to do, and it's very necessary. The second is he's got to say that the interest rate on the debt is higher than the defense budget. So we got all these new reforms last time. Now we're going to look at debt, and we're going to have to go back and actually increase Doge and start getting toward a balanced budget. And that's going to be, look at what happened in Minnesota. We've got to go back and look at all of the, we're going to have to look at all of the federal and state, local welfare programs that are suffering abuse. And then we're going to have to say the border is going to be closed to illegal immigration. And, we let in 1 million legal immigrants. And a lot of people are saying Somalis were legal. The people who were chasing Jews at Columbia were legal students that came in from the Middle East. So I think there's going to be a big push for a an open legal immigration policy toward people who share our values, and that's very controversial even to say that in America. So what we would say probably is the former British Commonwealth, Europe, people who are middle class that will come here and enrich the country and will not immediately go on public support. 70% of the Somalia community is on federal local support, contrary to what Representative Omar. So that's a kind of thing. And then, of course, to tell the American people we're going to have AI, but we're going to see a grid that's dominated by nuclear power, natural gas, and why we're going to have 10 or 20% solar or wind. It's going to depend on how competitive it becomes with technology, but we're not going to subsidize it as a money-losing technology. Here in California, we have as high rates as you. We're about double. We're the highest kilowattage in the United States, between 30 and 40 cents a kilowatt, and it's just massive solar farms going up everywhere and dismantling natural gas and nuclear and all of that. And it's not sustainable, and everybody knows it. So he knows what has to be done for national renew on matters of fiscal policy, welfare, defense spending. I might say very quickly, for all of the criticism, that's another criticism I have, that the image abroad of Pete Hegseth and here at home is he's a yokel guy with a tattoo and he doesn't know what he's over his head, and the generals. But actually, if you look what he's doing, he came in with 45,000 shortfall soldiers. And those people, if you look at the actual data, were largely white males who 8,500 of them had been kicked out for not wanting vaccinations, and the others had left because of DEI. And yet those were the people who died at double their numbers in the demographic in Iraq and Afghanistan. They are the people who volunteer to go to combat units, overwhelmingly. Well, now they're all back, 50,000 recruits. That was a miracle. We were told that they were fat, they had tattoos, they were drug users, that we're going to have to get used to a smaller army. Now we have more recruits than we can handle, and they're growing because of the dismantling of DEI and the emphasis on fighting and combat and not trans or this or that. And the other thing is, we were in a deadlock of Lockheed, General Dynamics, Northrop, Raytheon, revolving door. And it was what Eisenhower, had warned about, industrial military conflict. So we were having generals leaving, four-star admirals, generals, going to Northrop, going to Lockheed, using their former officers as conduits on procurement, becoming fabulously wealthy, and then going sometimes back into the Pentagon as civilians. And all of a sudden, Trump is now spreading that money all through. So Hegseth said, well, we're going to build F-35s, but we're going to build 1 million drones right away. And yes, we're going to build $14 billion aircraft carriers, but not as many. We're going to start building drone ships, smaller frigates, and we need a lot more ships, not just 11 of the biggest ships in the world. And we're going to look at Anduril and places like that, small companies that have hypersonic missile capabilities or iron beam emulation, stuff like that. So it's actually very encouraging what he's doing. And but he does, again, they have a problem that they have lost the narrative on that matter. And part of it's his fault, because he is emphasizing his macho side with the drug thing, but actually he's got a contemplative side that's a reform side that's making things that should have been done 20 years ago. So we'll see. But I think next year there will be a lot of things happening, but whether they have the skill to package this counter-revolution, because it's really fundamental. I've never seen anything like it. I work at a university, and all of a sudden, Stanford University says, yes, we only let in 9% white males, and now we're going to have the SAT back, just like that. And then, yes, anybody who disrupts or chases a federal judge out of the law school lecture is going to be expelled, just like that. And so I didn't think that would ever happen. And we had a 900-page report saying Stanford is endemically anti-Semitic, and we're going to stop that. And then we had another series of things. We've had 4 or 5 major espionage cases with Chinese students. And that was something you never talked about before. Now it's openly discussed that we have to do something about that. So this counter-revolution is affecting every element of American life, from the border to DEI to welfare to defense. But whether he has the wherewithal to keep going, he's 79, and whether he has enough people who are skilled enough to, and in media and everything, I don't know. But it reminds me of the Thermidor reaction against the Jacobins, the reign of terror, and I hope it doesn't lead to Napoleon sometimes, but it's an effort to undo 50 years of progressive politics.
Well, on that potentially alarming note, but quite positive note, we will look forward to the next 12 months in American politics. And thank you very much, Victor Davis Hanson, for coming on. It's always a great honor to talk to you.
Thank you for having me.